You're listening to Big World Network.
Skyfire, Episode 12, written and read by Arthur W. Johnson. I've given up my berth and trade for muddy earth and rusty spade. 'Tis dig all day and die each night, too tired to eat or drink or fight. Seamus flapped his blanket straight over his frame and rope bunk and laid the flimsy tick pillow across the top. He dropped to one knee and dragged out his tin cup plate and fork just as the breakfast bell rang through the heavy morning air. He joined the 100-odd men rushing from their tents to form a hungry line. "Mush again?" complained a young fellow near the front of the line. "Wouldn't be so bad," added another, "if they didn't flavor it with grease." "Hell, back in Tennessee we fed this slop to the hunting dogs," a third said. The thick air was heating up fast from the crackling sun rising over the canal bed and from the argument over the boredom of the same breakfast every morning. The men digging the canal in Ohio were a varied lot from different parts of the country, with a few immigrants thrown in for good measure. That made for some bitter battles, but no feelings were as hostile as those caused by the burly foreman, Tom Hodgkins. In fact, many potential battles were overlooked as men formed a ragged front against Tom. He was that hated. It was not so much that they were going up against him as they weren't giving him anything more to use against them. He purposely strode along the waiting chow line with steak and eggs on his tin plate, waving it for all to smell as he went. He stopped by a huge Tennessean, held the tray under his nose, and asked in mock generosity, "Want some of mine, boy?" The big man, a little slow of mind, thought he was serious and reached for the plate with a grin, only to have his knuckles cracked by the short club that Tom always had with him. The Tennessean dropped his empty plate in the dust and rubbed his sore hand, glaring through soiled locks at the foreman. "Ain't enough for all of you, boy," Tom said with a wave across the line. "And if I give some to you, I gotta give some to them." When the man from Tennessee bent to pick up his plate, Tom kicked him in the backside, sending him sprawling between the legs of the man in front of him. Tom laughed as he sauntered away, flaunting his steamy tray as he went. The entire breakfast line glared at him as the man from Tennessee was helped to his feet. "First day here?" asked the man who was helping him. "Yep, weren't a very genteel welcome, I don't reckon." "Watch yourself around that one," another man said, "and make sure he don't catch you sloughing off." "Hell, he ain't as bad as the foreman we had back in the Erie Canal in New York," an older man said. "He used to whip on us if we breathed the wrong way." "Yeah, but Kicker's got a mean streak as wide as this canal," said the previous man. Seamus turned to the Irishman he had befriended and asked, "Who's Kicker?" "That one," his friend said, pointing at Tom's back with his fork. "You saw what he just did, lad. He likes to kick." "Oh," he paused and thought, "I'll remember that." As he ate his thin, tasteless mush, Seamus recalled a thin, young fellow with whom he had worked on the docks back in New York called Kicker. He was a pleasant lad, though. The only thing he kicked was a ball. He never seemed to eat at meal breaks during the long day. Instead, the boy kicked a ball against the warehouse wall the full time. He was a quiet, hard-working lad. No one minded what he did to amuse himself. It was Seamus' first full day in the canal. He had arrived in the late afternoon the day before, was given a pick and put right to work. When the sun went down, he had been too tired to eat and had gone straight to his bunk. Now he was rested, fed, and ready for a full day as he approached the tool shed. A familiar face showed above the arms of the man who had slung a shovel over his shoulder as he turned from the tool shed door. "Kyle?" Seamus called out, moving from his second line of the day, rushing to greet his one-time shipmate. They embraced in the Irish fashion of brotherhood, ignoring the curious looks of the men in line. "Good to see you, Seamus," Tom Hodgkins bellowed. "If'n you lovers is done hugging, you might get your arses to the head of the canal now." He grimaced as he flung a pick at Seamus's feet. "Now get going." "Step lightly around him," Kyle whispered as they hurried away. "So I've heard," Seamus said as they walked. "I thought you were planning a fleet." "I was, and I nearly had my first ship." Seamus waited, but Kyle walked silently on. Finally, he could stand it no longer. Grabbing Kyle's sleeve, he stopped him and asked, "And?" He could tell by Kyle's expression that he was almost too embarrassed to talk about it. Then, with a sigh of resignation, Kyle said, "A good friend of mine, whose name I shall not mention, but whose initials are Seamus O'Flaherty, went to a lot of trouble to teach me to read when we were shipmates." Seamus nodded in agreement. Like a fool, I thought I could really read and understand anything that came along, his left brow forming a gable over the brown window of his eye, and asked, "Do you remember Marta, the lass I was seeing in New York while we were working the docks?" "Aye, and such a pretty sweet thing she was," Seamus began. Kyle waved him silent. "Sweet my aching heart," he said. "She was bait. She and her papa were a real pair of foxes in cahoots. Beware of girls with looks like that who say their papas are rich and are willing to back you." Kyle snorted in disgust as he stomped his shovel into the canal head. He looked over his shoulder and caught sight of Kicker watching them. "Look busy while I tell you the rest." Seamus sank his pick to its haft in the yellow clay of the canal head and pried loose a clump as Kyle continued. "I was really in a turmoil over her, and I thought I wanted to marry her. I was seeing her every evening and spending weekends at her flat. She knew about my dreams of a ship. Finally, she told me that her daddy was interested in helping me get started. Well, do you remember how much money I had saved before you left for Pennsylvania?" Seamus grunted agreement as he sank his pick into the canal face again. Kyle went on. "I had doubled that. I had lived like scum to do it, too." His anger rose and dissipated with each plunge of the shovel. "Her papa, the good and honest Alexander Fairbanks," he said through clenched teeth, "said I would have to invest it all in the ship, which I expected, and he would make up the difference." He sank his shovel deeper into the earth as he grew more hostile with the memory. He went on. "He had an agreement drawn up, a contract he called it, that I had to sign. I read it over as best I could, then put my name on the bottom line and handed him almost all my money. I kept a little to feed myself, but that's long gone now." "Then what?" Seamus grunted as he swung his pick. "Then a few days later I asked the good and honest Mr. Fairbanks how soon I would have my ship, and he asked, 'What ship?' I said, 'The ship we're buying.' And he acted ignorant. He said, 'I don't know anything about a ship.' I said, 'What about my money and the agreement signed?' And he said, 'Oh, that,' like it was some trifling matter. To him, with all his money, it probably was trifling." Kyle had dug deeper into the soil with each angry shovelful. "He brought out the contract and showed it to me. He said, 'Maybe you should read it over again, son.' But the big words were no more clear to me than they were the first time I read it. I said, 'What does all this mean?' He grinned like a cat with a mouse in a corner and said, 'In essence, what it says is that you were to locate and purchase a ship within 3 days or have no claim to any monies invested or promised. All my hard work and savings were gone, and because I signed that paper, there wasn't a thing I could do." The height of his anger sent him into such a digging frenzy that a cloud of dust formed around them. He stopped digging, and as the dust began to settle, he said, "I took it out on his hide before I left New York and came out here. That was 3 months ago." "It seems that you didn't get rid of all your anger," Seamus replied. The loose dirt and gravel crunched behind him, and he whirled to find Tom Hodgkins approaching. "What in the hell is going on over here? You digging a canal or a well?" Kyle looked down at the 3-foot-deep hole he stood in inside. He looked up at Kicker in dismay. "I'm docking your pay for the time you wasted digging that and the time it will take you to fill it in and tamp it down. You're lucky you're so far down or you'd have my boot up your backside for wasting the whole morning," he growled as he stomped away in search of prey he could reach. Kyle leaned against the edge of the hole, pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, and mopped his muddy brow. He looked at Seamus with a grin and a grimace all mixed up on his face as though he was fighting back tears, and he said, "Fairbanks is still costing me money." Seamus felt sorry for him, but there was little he could do for his friend. Words of consolation would do little good at this point. He looked over at Tom Hodgkins and said to Kyle, "He's watching. You better start filling in your well." A tankard of warm beer tasted good and helped to wash down the slop they called stew. It was nothing like good Irish stew. As a matter of fact, it was nothing like Seamus had ever tasted. He learned quickly that the meals never varied. They were served mush for breakfast and stew at noon, and for a change of pace, stew with a tankard of stale beer for supper. Most of the men were in the habit of gulping down the stew in a hurry to get past the taste of the rancid meat, then washing it down with the huge swigs of their beer to clear away the aftertaste. The remainder of the beer was carried away to the various activities devised by the men and savored for as long as there was a drop to drink. No one was ever allowed enough beer to get drunk. Seamus and Kyle generally joined in song with the Irish contingent, accompanied by a fiddle and a concertina. The tunes carried them back to the green pastures of home, which few would ever see again, but that they would all cherish in memory forever. Seamus's memories were a bit different. He saw the green of the willow and would forever mourn the sadness it brought. He had written to his father after his arrival in New York and received a reply after what seemed an eternity before he had left the city behind. When he read it, he was stunned, shocked, frustrated, and angry with himself in that order, for the letter carried news he would never have expected. The words had leapt from the page as he read. Before you left, my son, you had told me that with Patricia dead you had nothing to lose by killing Lord Mayfair. I knew how you felt, and I cried for you and your broken heart. Then Athlone was in turmoil, for when the servants of Mayfield Manor broke through the study door, they found Patricia standing over the monster's body with the pistol in her hand. They said she seemed to be in some sort of trance and could not explain why she had shot Lord Mayfair. Seamus had felt a new ray of hope. Patricia was still alive. Maybe he could go back and find love after everything that had happened. He had sat still and stared out over the masts in the New York harbor, dreaming of how it would be when he returned. Before he remembered the rest of the letter, he had eagerly lifted it and read on. She was jailed for several weeks. Finally, they hanged her for killing an English lord. As the hatch was released, the priest who was her confessor heard her say, "Be safe." Seamus had felt the hatch give way under his own hopes and watched his salty tears fall and mix with the salty waves along the wharf. What had he done? He could find no words to express his new grief. Through his tears, he read on half-heartedly. "Son, you can come home to the dad who needs you. There's no one to suspect you anymore. I'm getting too old to work the farm alone, and there's no one but you to leave it to when I die. Please come back, my son. Your loving father, Fahey." Seamus had read the letter several times, hoping that he had misunderstood the words. It was hard to believe that Patricia had been alive. But remembering what Mayfair was like, he realized that the beast could lie as easily as he could ride down a priest. He had said Patricia was dead to make him give up. Mayfair hadn't known how deeply Seamus loved her. He had probably been incapable of the emotion himself. To find out that she had picked up the pistol and inadvertently taken the blame for his crime gnawed at Seamus' conscience sorely. That she had died in his stead gave him a new ghost, one that he could not wish away as he had done the others. But she was not an angry ghost, for since that letter she always came to him under the willow with a smile of acceptance, whispering, "Be safe." The tears poured from his eyes when he thought of what she had done for him. He felt unworthy, but knew that he must go on or her death would be a waste. He had finally, after a long thought, written back to Fahey. The words of resignation read, "Knowing that my beloved died for me, I cannot face the land where we should have lived our lives in happiness, nor could I look any of the Darcys in the eye without wondering if they somehow knew the truth. I cannot come back, ever. I beg of you to see that my friend Robin Clancy has work. Take him in my stead as your heir. He will work hard and see to your needs as I would. Make him your son for me, and treat him as you would myself. Please understand, my father, that though I love you as a good son should, I cannot return. I am destined to stay in this land for as long as I live. Your loving son, Seamus."
Music by Kevin MacLeod.
You're listening to Big World Network.